This video is brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. Hi guys, I'm here with a video showing you all how I made my River Vixen costume. Right now I'm working on the skirt, or at least cutting out the fabric for it, and the skirt is a box pleat like most cheerleading uniforms. To figure out the size of the panels that I needed, I took the measurement around where I want the skirt to sit, which was kind of almost the widest part of my hips, and then divided that by a couple different numbers until I found something that was an even number and I liked the width that the panels turned out to be, which happened to be 4 inches plus 1 inch on either side, so that I had room for seam allowance and room for when it was pleated. Here I'm just cutting out the shirt part. I think I double checked the measurements just because I kind of doubted myself a little bit. To make this, I traced a shirt out to get this pattern a little bit, and then drew up the designs and everything that I would need, and I was just kind of hoping that it would fit, because this was kind of expensive fabric and I probably should have done something a bit more like I would know it would work, but I just kind of winged it and it worked fine though, and I was happy with the results. Anyways, now I'm cutting out the front section, which just has these triangles cut out on either side because that is where a white piece of fabric will go instead. If you don't want to try to draw up your own patterns, you can always grab mine. They are a reward for the month of November and will come out on my store and be a few months after that for fairly cheap. There's also a lot of cheerleading patterns in general out there, like from McCall's and Simplicity or whatnot, but make sure you are looking for a box pleat because that is a specific kind of pleating her or the River Vixen uniform skirts have. Here I'm just cutting out the panels for the white section of the skirt. For this measurement, I think I did about half of the measurement of the blue sections with like half an inch on either end for seam allowance, so I think it was like about 3 inches across. And the length of all these panels, I think I did about 12 inches or 11, something like that, because I'm fairly short, so yeah. And one of the last things left to cut out is a waistband, because I don't know, I don't really feel like trying to nicely fold over pleats and hem them, so I just attached everything to a thicker waistband, and I made the waistband about 3 inches, but it's folded because I just kind of wanted that thickness to the band. I didn't run any elastic through it or anything. This was stretchy fabric and worked perfectly fine as it was. So the total thickness of the band was 6 inches, but again, it's folded to be only 3 inches when, you know, the garment is finished. Next up, we have the long and tedious task of pinning everything together. So the first part of this video is going to be completely just working on the skirt. What I'm doing here is pinning all the panels that I made for the skirt together. Blue, white, blue, white, blue, white. Make sure to double and triple check that you are pinning everything so that the wrong sides for the panels, like where you're going to see like the seam and the stitching, is all facing the same exact way. And don't sew it if it's not, because I made that mistake with about 3 or 4 panels like 2 or 3 times each, and I just kept pinning it the wrong way, and then I sewed it that way, and I had to take it apart and then repin everything again, and it's a hassle. So again, that is my long and over worded story of just make sure everything is facing the same way before you sew it together. You can actually see me pin a couple panels the wrong way. Can you see which ones they are if you are paying attention to how I pinned the previous panel? Once you have everything pinned together, go ahead and sew it together. I used a just simple straight stitch and sewed straight down the fabric about 1/4 of an inch in or something, about that measurement. I'm not perfectly exact with measurements, but yeah, just sew it together. And then you'll end up with a giant strip of fabric. Now, taking that giant strip of fabric that we just sewn together, go ahead and fold over whatever side is going to be the bottom side, which doesn't really matter because both of the sides look exactly the same. So double fold over those edges so that you have this nice clean line. Pin that down and then sew it together. To sew this part, I swapped out thread. I sewed all of the blue sections down first, and then I went back in, changed out the thread for white thread, and then sewed down all the white sections because I wanted the thread to match each panel. My next step was a totally unnecessary step and something you can absolutely skip if your store has the right kind of bias tape. Mine did not have the right color of yellow bias tape thin enough, so I had to buy a double folded wider bias tape, cut it down the center, and then refold over the raw edge and iron that down. So that's what I spent a couple hours doing here, which I am not going to show you guys the full 2 or 3 hours it took me to iron down a ridiculous amount of bias tape. And I definitely recommend just buying bias tape. You are going to need white and yellow. I think maybe like 1/2 inch wide is about the measurement I was going for. And you're gonna need a lot of it because the skirt's being pleated means there's like twice as much fabric and length to it than you would normally need or use or have. So I think I used maybe about 5 yards of bias tape, maybe a full 6 or something for each color, but double the amount for yellow since the yellow has 2 lines of it and there's only 1 line of white. But once you are finally finished ironing all that bias tape, or if you just bought the right kind of bias tape from the beginning, go ahead and pin that to your skirt. I pinned the bottom yellow section about 1 inch above the bottom of the skirt. I pinned that part down first, and then I went back in and stuck the white bias tapes ever so slightly underneath the yellow so that I wouldn't have to sew down the yellow and then the white and then the yellow again and just sew down yellow bias tapes because it would overlap with the white, where like the stitching would overlap the yellow and the edges of the white fabric white bias tape, since the white bias tape was ever so slightly underneath the yellow bias tape. You will kind of see it here in a second, and if you look at photos of it you can see what I'm talking about. Once all that is pinned, go ahead and sew that down. See, this is where I was talking about where the white kind of goes slightly under both of the yellow bias tape, so that I can only have to sew down the yellow bias tape itself on the top and the bottom of each string or strand of bias tape. Wow, I'm using the word bias tape a lot, oh my god. Anyways, so just by stitching down that top part, it automatically also stitches down the white part, and I don't have to go through and stitch down the white bias tape as well, because that would just take way too long. Anyways, next up, I'm going to go ahead and begin pleating the dress. At this point, I had sewn the dress to, or the skirt, not a dress. I had sewn the skirt together so that now it is in a circular shape. And I'm going through and folding the fabric so that it will be pleated. The two blue sides need to touch each other. When it is completely folded and just even all the way down, you will not see any of the white fabric at all. You will see it here in a second, what I'm talking about. when I lay this flat and have my first pleat in place. To figure out how to, you know, make all the pleats even and whatnot, I folded the blue panels in half so that they lined up with each other, and then I measured 2 inches from the center on either side, put a pin there, and then folded that in so that it would touch the pin on the panel next to it, so that the 2 pins that were closest to each other with the white in between still, those would come together and touch, and then I would even out the white section on the bottom and pin everything down so that it was all nice and straight, so that I can iron it so that it would keep the shape that I have just pinned it in. Again, you will see better in the video in a second once it kind of starts to get laid out and comes together a little bit more. You'll see what I'm talking about, how the panel should look. So before ironing, I go ahead and along the top half of the top edge of the skirt, I just sew a straight stitch all the way across. You can also use a zigzag stitch, it doesn't really matter, whatever is going to work best for you. I didn't need this part to stretch as much though, so I just used a straight stitch, I believe. Yeah. And that was just to keep the pleats in place. Just, it helped better when sewing. You can probably skip this step, but I preferred it because that part's going to go into the seam when we attach the band anyways, so it's fine to have a stitch there. It's totally fine. And it helps when ironing, and it helps when sewing the band on. Now we finally get to the ironing part. And this took so long, oh my god. Please get yourself an iron that can hold water. Mine holds water in it, and you're able to steam or spray water and iron that. I found that helped so much when it came to pressing these seams, specifically because I did use a slightly thicker blue material. The white material was fairly thin, but the blue material was on the thicker side, and both of them were kind of stretchy. And I find stretchy fabric doesn't want to hold folds as well as a broadcloth fabric or would. So just a helpful little tip there, that steam and water will help these pleats hold better. I also believe there's a spray starch or something you can get to, again, help when ironing and trying to make something keep the shape that you are ironing it into. I didn't have that available to me, so, water worked fine. And it did help. A lot of pressing and ironing and a semi-high temperature kept the shape just fine and didn't damage the fabric at all, and it made everything look neat and crisp. I went ahead and also repinned it after I ironed it, just so that when I was rotating to iron a new section, it wouldn't cool in a weird shape, and it would cool in the folded shape. I didn't know if that would affect it or not, but that might have helped. Anyways, now I'm sewing on the band, and I'm sorry, I am rambling a lot in this video, but I'm sewing on the band here, and for that I used a zigzag stitch and just attached it all the way across the skirt, and then sewed the back together closed because it is stretchy. I didn't need to add any zippers or clasp. And that finishes the skirt. Now I'm moving on to the shirt. Here I'm just attaching the white triangular sections that are on the front of the top in place and sewing that down. And now it's time to work with more bias tape. Taking white bias tape first, I go ahead and pin that where I want that to sit, and then I will pin the yellow bias tape sections on top, again slightly overlapping that white bias tape so that I can just sew both down in one stitch. I start off by doing only one half of this weird bias tape lining thing that they've got going on their uniform before going ahead and pinning the bottom half. And this was just because it was more convenient to sew. Now I'm just sewing on, or pinning, and then we'll be sewing on the bottom part of the weird lining thing they got going on in the same way I did the top part. And in the middle where it meets up, I didn't care too much about how it looked because it will be covered by a patch. The patch that I got is from my friend Hawktail Cosplays. Her patches are so amazing. I was incredibly happy with how it turned out, and they are a very good price. So I definitely recommend you contact her if you are looking for a patch. She does iron-on patches, and I believe also like just the normal sew-on option if you want that. Iron-on is really straightforward, really simple. I do not have a clip of it, but literally all you do is take the patch, peel off the little paper on the back, stick it on where you want it, and then press it on with an iron, and it's good. After that, though, I went ahead and pinned down all of the edges of the shirt, like the front and back pieces together. Make sure that the right sides are facing inwards because you do not want your seams on the outside of your shirt. And go ahead and sew that down. I sewed that with a zigzag stitch. Once your shirt is together, you are going to want to make sure that you have nice pretty edges. So go ahead around any of the remaining raw edges, which will be around the neck, arm, and bottom of the top, and double fold that over, pin that, and sew that down. Again, I went ahead and matched the thread color to the color that the shirt was, so that meant I sewed down all of the blue section first, stopping where there was like white or yellow, and then went through and sewed down the white and yellow sections. And that completes the construction of the main outfit. To finish up the entire costume, there was a few little details that I needed to do. They have these pom-poms on their shoes. Depending on the character you're cosplaying will depend on the color. Veronica had yellow pom-poms on her shoes though, so I went ahead and took some yellow yarn, wrapped that around this small little box I had, tied that together as you can see here, and then cut the remaining loops open. Then I went ahead and trimmed that so that it would be about the length and size that I wanted it to be, and fluffed that out. I don't show it here, but I would later just take some more yellow yarn and tie that directly onto my shoelaces of the shoes. Because nice pom-poms can be expensive and aren't always the right colors, I got some cheap yellow pom-poms off eBay that come on these giant sticks, so I went ahead and took a hacksaw and sawed those down because that was a ridiculous length. I also used 4 instead of 2 because I wanted them to be very thick and fluffy, and I would combine the 2 by using duct tape later, which I don't show here, but I just taped them together. And that is it for this cosplay. I hope you guys found this helpful. Have a lovely day, and stick around for future videos. Bye!